Today on the Golden Bolt, it's time to dive into the very best games that 2019 had to offer, and I'd also like to highlight some of the best games that you probably missed throughout the year that deserve a visit today. Unlike in previous years, this won't be structured in the traditional top 10 countdown format, mainly because, to be totally honest, I don't think anything beyond my top 2 or 3 feels solidly locked into a rank. I'll still be dedicating a lot of time to my number 1 pick at the end of the video, so make sure to stick around for that, but instead of a top 10, I think it would be more fun to talk in a bit more detail about a smaller set of games this year, especially since you almost certainly didn't play some of these games. In fact, why don't we start with one of my 2019 favorites that I can guarantee most of you haven't even heard of. That game is a wonderful indie title developed by just 2 people, Annodyne II. If you have played it, kudos, you got to experience one of the best games this year, and a game that I will be eternally mad has flown under the radar. As a quick disclosure, I received a press copy of Annodyne II from the developer, and I loved the feel of the game so much that not only will it receive its own video sooner rather than later, I even bought and played through Annodyne I in its entirety first before going back to 2, and then I bought the very limited collector's edition of 2 to support the game and its developers while I figure out just what it is I want to say about it. The first thing you've already noticed about Annodyne II is that it's a very rare 32-bit inspired game. This is pretty refreshing because usually the retro inspiration stops around the 16-bit mark for whatever reason. Probably because 32-bit games can tend to be pretty ugly. There, I said it. Annodyne II, though, uses that ugliness to an extent. Its rough, polygonal edges perfectly capture the nostalgia of the 5th generation of consoles, while also making sure not to fall into the pitfalls that often make those games eyesores today. Modern lighting and texturing techniques, for example, lead to this clash of styles that in many ways match some of the game's themes. Even if this clash sometimes makes you feel uncomfortable, the warm, inviting music counters that instinct in your brain to run and instead sets your mind at ease. And in some ways, your mind has to be at ease, because in Annodyne II, the main character Nova is diving into the minds of other characters in this world. While the overworld is played in a 3D style, Nova shrinks down in size to enter and clean the psyches of the NPCs infected with this damaging particle known as dust. Not only that, when she shrinks down into these Zelda-inspired dungeons, Nova drops in resolution and loses a dimension, as the game becomes a 16-bit top-down action-adventure game. This is where Annodyne II really works its magic. Each dungeon tells the story of the character you're entering. You'll see manifestations of the important people in their lives, their concerns, their fears, their hopes and dreams, very much in a similar vein to something like Psychonauts. Despite these characters obviously being fictional, these dungeons are an arguably invasive, deeply personal, and vulnerable experience. It feels like you're seeing and hearing things that should be off limits to any other living being besides the one you're currently occupying. I'm trying to be as vague as I can because I don't want to rob anybody of the experience of either Annodyne game. They're some of my favorites that I've played this year, mostly because of how much they say, often without saying anything at all, and how much they can make you think. If you liked games like Psychonauts, and even I would argue Undertale because of how they challenged your expectations from video games, Annodyne stands at least as tall as those 2 games, and in my opinion, it rises above them. You'll find yourself questioning the motives of the characters guiding you through the objectives, and later the motives of the game itself, as Annodyne's 2-person development team really loves to play with your expectations and twist your understanding of the world throughout its adventures. Annodyne II is currently only available on PC, but as far as I've heard, a console release should be in the cards for the first half of 2020. When it does, please make sure you pick it up for another truly one-of-a-kind experience, a game by a developer that loves to use the medium in innovative and evocative ways. Annodyne I, though, is already available on consoles, so in the meantime, if you are a console-only player, give that one a shot. The gameplay in that one leaves a little bit more to be desired since it's a very simple Link's Awakening-inspired 8-bit adventure game, but there's again just so much to unpack, and it's a game that made me cry a couple times because of how absolutely beautiful both the underlying themes and the actual dialogue can be. From one game I struggle to fully describe to another, let's move on to a game that absolutely nobody missed in the headlines, but that many people completely missed out on playing. And frankly, Death Stranding is a game that I can't blame you for skipping. If I had to pay for it instead of receiving it as a birthday present, I would have skipped it too. The thought of pure, unfiltered Hideo Kojima was terrifying to me, and nothing about the previews was appealing in my eyes. Really? After putting over 30 hours into Death Stranding and completing the story, I'm still not sure I can verbalize what about it appeals to me even now, but I'm gonna try. I certainly can't call Death Stranding that fun of a game. All you do is walk, run, climb, or ride through an empty wasteland, trying not to fall over as you deliver the mail. That's the entire gameplay loop. All you're doing is maintaining your balance as you struggle your way across the country. Depending on how you play, the first half dozen, hell, maybe even the first dozen hours will rarely, if ever, be fun. It's just a tedious pain. And it's not until Chapter 3 that the game starts to really open up. But when it opens up, it clicks. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Death Stranding becomes a unique, enthralling experience that you won't want to put down. First off, credit where it's due, this might actually be the simplest overall narrative that Kojima's put out since before Metal Gear was solid. There are twists, turns, and 30 heaping scoops of ham-fisted writing, but the A to B plot doesn't require any extra codex to grasp. It's all spelled out in the cutscenes that bookend most chapters, or in the flavor dialogue that you'll hear as Norman Reedus treks across the United States. That plot, for those that have only absorbed Death Stranding info from its nebulous trailers, is that Reedus' character Sam is tasked with crossing the continental US, now an apocalyptic hellscape thanks to a mysterious event known as, you guessed it, the Death Stranding. As a consequence of the Death Stranding, rainfall is now timefall, and anything caught in timefall ages, dies, and decomposes rapidly. Sam is traveling the continent to reconnect the different knots across the former US, allowing for the different cities to digitally share resources and, to quote the game a million times over, make America whole again. There's a lot more to it than that, of course, but that's the most basic gist that I can provide. The world here, while simple, is horrifying. That rain alone could kill you is fascinating, and accompanying the rain are BTs, the invisible remnants of the dead that are beached on our world and will try to kill you if they detect you. And even though if Sam dies he'll respawn thanks to being essentially immortal, dead bodies in this world nuke the surrounding area, permanently altering the terrain, and if you're close to a town, perhaps killing tens of thousands. And in spite of Death Stranding's world seeming and sounding hopeless, this is a positively refreshing game. It's a game about hope and staying connected, because humanity's social nature can be both our greatest weakness and our greatest strength. When you're in a region connected to the network that Sam's establishing, you'll find items, ladders, safe houses, vehicles, and other helpful things left by your fellow players in their own game world. Think of it as an extension of the Dark Souls shared world mechanic, except here it's pretty much only helpful. Using your own resources to establish roads, zipline paths, and bridges will help some players in their own games, as those same foundations will appear for them. You'll constantly receive likes from players who use these resources as a thanks, and you can give likes in return when using another player's things. As somebody who uploads videos to a social network, you already know that I appreciate likes, and receiving hundreds of thousands passively, knowing that I'm helping other real people, that is the fun of Death Stranding. I'm not the first person, nor will I be the last to say this. Your struggles when trying to connect new knots to the network are quickly forgotten as soon as that region is connected, because instantly that same terrain that you spent half an hour traversing lights up with hundreds of player-created assets. Now it's as simple as ziplining your way back and forth in seconds. The fun here comes from easing the pain of others. And yes, that also means that Kojima's team designed a game that's intentionally painful. That's the antithesis of good game design, and it's why Death Stranding is one of the most polarizing games in recent memory. However, if you can find yourself becoming engrossed in the incredibly hammy plot with the horribly on-the-nose names and characterizations, and you can find yourself turning your brain off during much of the actual gameplay, Death Stranding rewards you with some of the best character performances I have ever seen in a video game. It rewards you with a truly hopeful experience that's much needed in an incredibly fractured world, and of course, it rewards you with those sweet, sweet YouTube likes. Because this game has such a love it or hate it response from players, I would never be able to name this my game of the year even if I wanted to, and for the record, I don't want to. But that's not gonna stop me from, against all odds, recommending that you at least give it a shot. Chances are you'll never experience another game quite like it. And while we're doing these fun transitions between games, let's jump from a game unlike anything else to a series that has no peer. Released in Japan at the end of 2018 and then hitting the West in June, Judgment is your annual reminder that you need to play Yakuza. In fact, I would argue that Judgment is the most accessible game in the series for newcomers. It features an all-new cast of characters and story, the intrigue of a murder mystery detective-styled narrative with new gameplay elements to boot, and most notably, it features the first fully English voiceover that the series has had since the very first Yakuza game. I know how much of a struggle it can be to get into this series. It's unwaveringly Japanese at its heart, and there's a lot you have to learn quickly to keep up with the story's breakneck twists and turns. This Yakuza spin-off dials that back several notches, telling a significantly longer, slower burn story that gives you some more room to breathe. For the most part, the new cast surrounding our protagonist Yagami are not Yakuza themselves, and instead each have distinct personalities not only from one another, but from the cast of the proper Yakuza series. And very quickly you'll connect with their motivations, their struggles, and the underlying humanity that often hides beneath the hardened shells of the Japanese mafia. This, along with the fantastic translation work that went in to ensure that the English dub feels westernized and welcoming to players unfamiliar with the minutia of Japanese culture, makes me feel that Judgment is the perfect place to start this amazing franchise. Of course, for longtime Yakuza fans, the game feels right at home while bringing that different flavor to the table. You're still exploring the familiar but ever-changing Kamurocho, you're still engaging in some of the craziest side missions found in any game, period, such as having to chase and fight a serial groper named, I swear to God, Ass Ketchum, and you're still experiencing the absolutely gorgeous dragon engine that's made the recent Yakuza games some of the most beautiful out there on any console from any developer. This series is one that I've put countless hours into this year. I finally sat down and finished Kiwami, immediately started and finished Kiwami 2, and then put time into Judgment a couple months after that, after swearing I wouldn't play Judgment for at least a few months because I needed to, eat and live. Yakuza is actually part of the reason that I didn't release that many videos in the early part of last year, because I was just so invested in this series' unmatched charm that I had to see what was next. Trust me, this is a series that you will fall in love with, even if you are absolutely certain that you won't. I'm just gonna keep doing these corny transitions, I love it. Moving from one game that destroyed my video schedule in 2019 to another, I'd be remiss not to mention Respawn's Apex Legends. This game became something of a comfort food for me and my buddies throughout 2019. None of us had any interest in the Battle Royale craze. In fact, I've mostly been off the multiplayer shooter train since I grew tired of Halo and Battlefield back in 2011 and 2012 respectively. So when Apex launched in February, we decided we'd give it a shot to, if nothing else, give us an excuse to finally play Titanfall 2 together like we've been swearing we would eventually do. And the game just clicked for us on so many levels. I could credit the unique characters and abilities making up interesting team combinations a la Overwatch, the fact that strong team play is arguably required for success here, the responsive gunplay and fun, relatively well-balanced arsenal of weapons, the ability to revive dead teammates adding another layer to the usually one-and-done battle royale genre, or another handful of things, but what it really comes down to is that Apex Legends truly is junk food in video game form. That urge to play just one more match or to get just one more win kept each of us awake later or away from other work longer than we would ever intend. Again, you can draw a direct correlation between our Apex sessions and the less frequent uploads, not only for myself, but also for my buddies Token Geek and Mykonos Fan. Yeah, that's right, I'm calling you two out, losers. And while on one hand I know each of us wish we would have been more consistent with videos in 2019, I don't think any of us regret our time eating this junk food because we did it together. Apex time became time to churn out video ideas and float them to one another, to craft new series, new focuses, and of course to joke around and just shoot the breeze. It's absolutely not the best game I've played this year, but it's definitely the one I put the most time into, and playing Apex forged stronger friendships with many people I already considered some of my closest friends. Since then, we've played many more games together, and yes, that finally includes Titanfall 2. And for the most part, we've taken a bit of a break from Apex as the lengthy seasons have started to drag on for just a bit too long to maintain our interest. But even this week, we cranked out some rounds and had a blast. If for no other reason than this, it more than deserved an honorable mention today. Okay, I'm not gonna lie to you, I kind of ran out of witty transitions, but there's just one more game I want to talk about before we get into my game of the year. This game is another one that's flown a little bit under the radar, which is a travesty. I'm talking about Ukulele and the Impossible Lair. I, like many others, was not and still am not a fan of the original Ukulele for many reasons. I recently went back to it to try and do some research for a potential video involving both Ukulele and its sequel, and I still hate the first game's bloated world design, the over-ambition, and the distinct lack of fun platforming that this platformer actually has. So when a sequel was quietly announced, and when I found out it was cutting back from a 3D collectathon into a 2.5D platformer in the same vein as Donkey Kong Country, I didn't really pay much attention to it. I am so glad I came around to it though, because Impossible Lair is one of the best crafted 2D platformers not only in recent memory, but in my opinion, maybe ever. When the development team at Playtonic, which keep in mind is heavily made up of former Rare employees that worked on both Banjo and DKC, had the opportunity to scale things back and focus just on tight gameplay and level design, they absolutely excelled. Every one of the game's 20 main levels has an alternate B-side form that completely alters the playstyle, be it a level that becomes flooded or frozen or covered in sticky honey that allows for wall jumps. And this intelligent recycling of assets never feels like it's just blatant reuse. Instead, it feels like innovation, like the team remembered after the first Ukulele game that less is more, and that more usually ends up being less. And these levels, both versions of each, are some of the strongest design that I've experienced in a 2D platformer, holding right up there with the best that games like DKC have ever had to offer. The game's overworld takes a step back too, playing in a much blockier, more basic 3D hub world rather than the full-scale overworlds that we're seeing in the first game. And unlike the first game's massive worlds, just about every inch of this hub has some secret to be found, some puzzle to be completed, some way to enhance both itself and the storybooks that contain those 2D levels. Perhaps most of all, I love that in a pseudo-collectathon twist, you can complete as many or as few of these 2D levels as you wish, because you can attempt the final level, the titular Impossible Lair, at any time. It's even the very first level you play in the game, acting as both a tutorial and foreshadowing for the endgame. Be warned though, they are not kidding when they call it impossible. Even if you've 100% completed the rest of the game, you'll still probably struggle here. Each A-side or B-side of a level that you complete will save one of the Queen Bee's Battalion, which grants you an extra hit point in the Impossible Lair itself. If you do everything in the game, you'll have about 50 extra hits in the Impossible Lair, and that still might not be enough. The game makes you earn your successes or failures in this final level, and it's just an amazing touch. I found myself going back and trying it periodically to see if I could beat the game with 10, 15, or 25 Bs, and every time I got my ass handed to me. I can't speak highly enough about the Impossible Lair. It's probably the biggest surprise of 2019 for me. Alright, it's just about time for the big one, for my game of the year, and I've gotta be honest, I kinda lied to you earlier. There's one other reason that I didn't make this into a top 10 list, and it's because I don't have one game of the year for 2019. I have a 1A and a 1B. These two games, for very different reasons, resonated with me on just about the same wavelength, and I adore both. Strangely enough, I 100% expected one of these games to be here, and I had no intention of buying the other. Let's start with what I would call game 1B right now, and it's a game that I made a video on not too long ago, The Outer Worlds. As I mentioned in that video, The Outer Worlds feels like a game that's been hand-built for my enjoyment, a game that's perfect for me specifically. One thing I regret about that video, though, is that I had done almost everything by the time I recorded it, but I didn't realize that I was literally one mission away from beating the main story. I honestly thought I was at the end of Act 2. Everything about what I'd done to that point felt like it was leading into a third act, and then the game just kind of rushed to the finish. I still stand by everything I said in that video, but I'd be lying to you and myself if I said I wasn't just a tiny bit disappointed by that fact. With that said though, The Outer Worlds still made me laugh countless times. It got me invested in several amazing characters and plot threads. It kept me hooked for a tightly wound 30 or so hours before I had done everything, and it left before it could overstay its welcome. When I first played Obsidian's Fallout New Vegas in 2010 and 2011, I put hundreds of hours into it, and I loved every single one of those hours. But nowadays, between the Golden Bolt, my personal life, my day job, school, and the dozen other things I do, I don't have hundreds of hours to dedicate to a single game anymore. Before you say anything, shut up. I know I just mentioned Apex Legends. Don't remind me. That The Outer Worlds clocks in at no more than 35 hours to do everything in one playthrough says to me that Obsidian respects the player's time, and I respect that. Anyway, I already spent half an hour talking about how much I love The Outer Worlds. If you want to know more, I strongly encourage you to check out that video. And don't tell me you did already, because that was my worst performing video of 2019. When I took time to sit and ruminate on every game that I'd played from 2019 though, I couldn't shake one game that just edged out The Outer Worlds. It's a game from a series that I don't like, a game that I had no interest in until maybe a few days before launch, but it's a game whose journey and ending left me perhaps more satisfied than any game in recent memory. My 1A, my Game of the Year for 2019, is Fire Emblem Three Houses. From the very moment it was revealed, I've died on the hill that this game looks horrible, and I've died on the hill that I didn't even care for the name Three Houses compared to the names of previous Fire Emblem games. I didn't like the idea of a school-focused setting for the game. What works for something like Persona didn't feel like it would work in a magical, medieval-inspired world. It just ended up giving me Harry Potter vibes for no fair reason. And I don't care much at all for Potter either, so that was just kind of a double whammy. Plus, I'm not a strategy RPG fan in just about every instance, especially as somebody who tends to be a perfectionist. Previously with games like Awakening, if one thing went wrong, I would reset the entire battle because of the series' permadeath feature. Losing a party member forever was a huge concern for me, and having to replay entire battles to avoid that just makes the games tedious. For its entire development cycle, I couldn't have been any less interested in Three Houses. In a weird poetic twist, only 3 things were able to convince me to give Three Houses a fair shake. The encouragement of a few of my friends who were loving it, the return of the rewind feature, allowing you to undo moves a set number of times per battle to prevent those permadeaths, and a single line of dialogue where a character asks a girl to choke him. I don't have a good explanation for that last one. I just thought it was really funny coming from a Nintendo game. In my first playthrough, where I chose the Golden Deer faction solely because I'm legally obligated to choose anything with the Golden in the title, I was instantly sucked into the addicting character progression loop, both in and out of battle. I was engrossed in all of these different characters with different backgrounds, and how they would all come together not only as a faction or a class, but a family. I was absorbed into molding these characters into their ideal combat classes and creating an impenetrable team both on and off the battlefield. Speaking of off the battlefield, I was wrong about the school setting. The monastery where you teach your house's students every month in between missions was a fantastic touch to facilitate the bonds that you forge with your party members. The obvious comparison, which I already made before, is Persona, where by day you'll live out your life as a student, choosing what to do, who to interact with, and so on, while by night you fight demons and save the world. However, I'll say it, I think Three Houses does Persona better than Persona. That's because what you do in these character portions has a more direct impact on the gameplay portions. Your affinity with characters can determine critical hits or the efficacy of some attacks when you're near those characters in combat. Teaching your students lets you forge them into the kind of fighter you'd like them to be, which in turn feels like you're giving them the confidence to grow as people on top of as fighters. Just going and talking to these students and teachers feels like it has a substantial impact on the game part of this game. Whereas in the entire Shin Megami Tensei franchise, both the main series and Persona, and hell, for that matter, every Atlus game I've ever played, with one key exception, I've always felt that it's sort of just two different games being thrown together with an extra dollop of style as the glue. All of this led to me absolutely loving the Golden Deer's team, as well as many of the transplants that I brought in from the other houses. And then when all was said and done, when we wrapped up the final boss, not only was there a detailed exposition for each and every character that had worked to help me along the way, telling me what they did with their lives after the big climactic battle, one character in particular dropped my jaw, genuinely dropped my jaw with the culmination of their character arc. It's not a scene I'm going to recollect here, both for story reasons and because after 40 hours of gameplay, I can't do it justice in 30 seconds, but it's one of my favorite character moments, possibly of all time. This moment, along with the rest of the characters' epilogues, left me feeling complete in my experience with Three Houses. Again, this was a game that I only bought because of a funny line of dialogue, and it left me with a tear in my eye and a lump in my throat because of how damn well it wrapped up, and it's leaving me right now, as I recollect it to you, with actual goosebumps. I finished Three Houses feeling wholly satisfied on just about every imaginable level after just one of 4 different story playthroughs you can do. I left with this warm sense of satisfaction that I haven't felt in an incredibly long time with a video game. If I never touched this video game again, I think that that level of satisfaction would have put it at the top of my list this year no matter what. And in fact, I was so satisfied with the Golden Deer playthrough that after the epilogue, I turned the game off with no intent of playing it again anytime soon. And then I went back the very next day and started one of the other factions for a totally different story. That is how fantastic Fire Emblem Three Houses is, and that is why I would say it is my game of the year for 2019. Now it's your turn. What was your top game of last year? Let me know by leaving a comment down below. I'd really love to hear it. And while you're down there, let me know what games you're most excited to play through in 2020, because while it's great to look back, it's also just about time to start looking forward. Next time here on The Golden Bolt, I'll be doing just that as I look at some of the games I'm most excited for in the coming year, as well as some of the games that I'm most concerned about. If you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to catch that video and many, many more. I've got big things planned for 2020, so you'll definitely want to be in on the ground floor. With all that said, as always, until next time, stay golden. This video was made possible in part thanks to the generous support of these Patreon backers. If you'd like to see your name on this list, you can do so by supporting the channel at patreon.com/thegoldenbolt. Thank you.